Okay, folks, this is our last remote speaker coming to us from somewhere in Ontario. Are you there? Hello, Dr. Brown, how are you? Can you hear me? Hello, Dr. Brown. There we are. Can you hear us? No, he's not nodding his head yet, or maybe he's like me. Can you hear me, Dr. Brown? David, do you know anything about that? There we are. No, we're not hearing him yet. I can see him speaking, but he's not. We're not hearing you yet. What are we missing?
The computer's on.
There we are. Thank you, sir. Hello, Dr. Brown. Can you hear me now? Hello, Dr. Brown. No, I can hear me, but I can't hear him. Okay. Should work. Can you hear us, Dr. Brown? No, I can see you. No, we're not getting your volume. Did we do a test on this, David? Was it working before? You don't by any chance have your microphone muted, Dr. Brown? No, we're not hearing you. This is well, this is interesting. I was just as I was getting my coffee, I was thinking, well, boy, things are going smoothly. We've really got this figured out. You know what I mean? It was. Dr. Brown doesn't need to hear this. I'll tell you. I've got in the habit of saying about people, oh, I don't remember when I didn't know them. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I said, I don't remember when I didn't know you. And he said, we met yesterday. And I said, well, okay, well, maybe my memory's worse than I thought it was, but in any event. David's trying to talk to Dr. Brown. We actually did meet Dr. Brown about, I would say it's 10 years ago now, but it might be longer than that. He was speaking to a men's rights group in Edmonton. We went to listen to him, and then he was driving back to Ontario, so he stopped in Lloydminster and spoke to a group of our friends in Lloydminster as well. Just while David's trying to work it out, any luck? Pardon? Yeah, exactly.
John has stories about Grover Cleveland's Deputy Undersecretary of Transport.
Okay. Well, why don't we, John, are you ready with your closing comments? Why don't we, I don't see how we're going to get this fixed if it's, yeah. Have you got a story about Grover Cleveland? Okay. Okay, I'll just tell the joke first and we'll see. Yeah. Colonel Redmond has a joke.
I hope I haven't used this one for you folks before, but this is a military joke and it's inappropriate, so be prepared to be offended. It's World War II. You're flying over Nazi Germany, and unfortunately, 2 fighter pilots are shot down from the British side over Germany. Very quickly, they're both captured, and they're dragged off into the middle of the city, down into the dungeons in Gestapo headquarters. And there's an Englishman and an Irishman. And the Englishman is in the second cell. The Irishman's in the first cell. And the Englishman's sitting in his cell, and he hears the Gestapo coming down the staircase. Clump, clump, clump. He hears the door to the cell, to the Irish pilots. The thing crashes open. And he hears the Gestapo officer say, "So, you will tell me how many aircraft there are in your squadron. You will tell me the name of your squadron leader. And you will stop hitting me when I'm questioning you."
Bob tells a story about when the Germans would catch some soldiers and they would ask them a question, and of course they would say is their name, rank, and serial number, and then so they would ask the first guy the question, and when they didn't answer, they'd shoot him. And then they'd ask the second guy the question, and when he didn't answer, they'd shoot him. And as the German story went, it said sometimes we had to shoot the third guy, but we never had to shoot the fourth guy. He always told us what we needed to know, but hopefully I'm never in that situation where I have to know that. But okay. Okay. Isn't this something? Well, why don't we? Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you one of the stories I was going to tell in my closing remarks. And again, it's like Colonel Redmond. Maybe it's appropriate, maybe it isn't. But one of the things that bothers me is some of the talk we hear about the residential schools. And because I'm sure there was some bad things happened at the residential schools, but there was a lot of good things happened there as well. And my mother had, my grandmother had 8 kids, 6 of them. Yeah, I could call them, yeah. Okay, sure. Just a second. No, that's fine. Most of the people here have heard it already anyway, but I just thought I'd tell it with just a second.
I'll tell the joke about opening their eyes because we're sitting here being challenged. How do we get the message out? How do we get people to wake up? And again, I want to run in here.
Come to the microphone.
Our biggest challenge really is to be enlightened and to have that knowledge. You know, in order to do better, we need to know better. And I'm going to go back to our education system in that they don't want kids to think for themselves, that they want them to actually just do what they're being told. And this has been a real problem with climate change, with COVID, and who knows what their next act's going to be, but I think it's going to continue down the health lines because fear is the greatest motivator, and they get to do that. And so if people aren't reading and don't understand, it's easy to baffle them with BS and scare them to death, basically. But anyways, Pierre Polyev is sitting there with Pierre Trudeau's younger son, and they're walking down the street. And, well, I guess I got to back up. I'm really, really bad at jokes. And John, humor is always the most humorous thing about humor for me is myself. But Pierre's son is walking down the street, and a little boy with some puppies is sitting there and showing off his wonderful little puppies and everything else. And Trudeau Jr. is quite intrigued with this, and oh, they're so cute and everything else. And he says, but what type of puppies are they? And he looks up at him and he says, they're liberals. And Trudeau just lights up. This is just so exciting, so wonderful. And a couple of weeks later, he sees Pierre Polyev walking down the street, and he goes and grabs, I got to show you this cute little kid and his puppies down here. And Pierre says, okay, we'll go look at them. And he stops in there, and he's looking at them and showing them and bragging about what great puppies they are. And then he asks the little boy, so what kind of puppies? Tell this individual what kind of puppies they are. And he says, they're conservatives. And Trudeau goes, what? What's changed? When I was here 2 weeks ago, they were liberals. And he says, yes, but now their eyes are open. And but that's the challenge. What do we do to get people to open their eyes? I mean, puppies and cats and all of those, and in 2 weeks they open their eyes. But it's a real challenge to get people, And again, the bigger challenge is it's easy to deceive someone, but it's even more difficult to get someone to accept that they've been deceived. And so when we talk about that deception and having that knowledge, but our challenge is education. And that's why Danny and I, after 2012, when we both failed, we said, what have we got to do? And I went back, and again, historically, I think quite a few of you know that my grandfather was in the social credit government with Ernest C. Manning. He was the provincial treasurer, and he was always opening my eyes to the problems and opening my eyes to a greater level and our civic duty, what we're supposed to do in order to preserve the good governance that we all need. But if we don't understand it, we're not going to be able to achieve it. And so, the social credit back in their history, when they were getting their chapters up and things going, they studied, they read, and they had common discussions on things. And that's always been a goal of mine, but I've never gone out and really never had time to do it. I've mentioned it several times, but we really, as a group, need to start picking a book. My favorite writer that I like is Bastiat, but there's lots. The Wealth of Nations by John Adams is a little, or Smith, is a little bit thick. But have we got him now, David? But anyways, the bottom line is we need to get educated. That's what the EEA is all about, and then we'll be a little bit more educated here in a minute, I think. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I love that puppy story. It's just as funny as the first time I heard it in 1971. But anyway, those good puppy stories never go away. Hello, Dr. Brown. Are you there now? No, I can. Can you hear me? Something is muted on your end. It's not a computer, is it? Have you got a mute button there on mute? Can you, because...
So we need to talk to the phone, and we can watch it.
He's phoning me again, so...
Okay, so for some reason something's muted on your end, so it might not work. But you could just use the phone here. I'll put it to the mic. And we'll appreciate it. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Not sure what that is.
I don't know what that is. I think we should. I think we should let John make his closing remarks, and we'll see if. What do you think, David? Is that gonna?
No, it's just making people now.
No, there's something. Dr. Brown, tell him that we could hear him for a minute, but now we don't hear him. So
Started beeping.
maybe I didn't pay my phone bill. Who knows?
Yeah, it is, yeah. Okay, try to call him one more time. Hi, sorry, the phone started beeping. I'm not sure if we're gonna get feedback or not, but try to call him and see if we can get it.
Okay.
Go
I'm
ahead.
game. I'm game.
Okay, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I'm game.
I think we should cancel this. It's just not working well at all.
If it doesn't work out, we'll get to the last speaker or next one. Hopefully you get
That's probably my fault, because I was thinking at lunch how smoothly things were going, so that probably brought it on ourselves.
Well, evidently life is what happens while you're making other plans. I get to do my own intro, so yeah, it's that guy again. And I believe that you have my PowerPoint, David? One of the many fascinating subjects on which I could discourse is the question of naming files in such a way that other people can see what it was that you were thinking. Many years ago, there we are. I don't get to tell that boring story, but I do get to tell some other boring stories. And it's interesting because I figured that basically I would be the last thing between you and the exit, which is, I think, is sort of breaking an old vaudeville rule, but actually I'm the last thing between you and a technological malfunction, so that makes you somewhat more receptive to my remarks than you might otherwise be. I do have the privilege of giving the last remarks at these conferences, and so of course part of the challenge is to think, well, what can I say that I haven't already said? But of course there are certain things like the Lord's Prayer that are just meant to be said over and over again, so I say things like thank you all so much for attending and for having faith that we can, in fact, fix the problems that beset us as a society. I certainly do believe that. Of course, I also believe that the Toronto Maple Leafs could win the Stanley Cup. So, yeah, you don't even want them to, but it's proof that my high spirits are not easily quenched. Also, thank you to all the speakers who have made this conference so good, and I look forward also to sharing these things, getting the videos out online so that we can extend the reach of our deliberations further and further out into the country. And of course, as you know, one of the reasons that I am so confident, despite the preposterously long odds that we face, is that we are on the side of truth, and the universe is constituted in such a way that truth will ultimately prevail. And so, of course, now I'm going to quote G.K. Chesterton again. And he said of the family, this triangle of truisms of father, mother, and child cannot be destroyed. It can only destroy those civilizations which disregard it. Which you'll agree is not exactly a cheerful note on which to launch into my remarks, because of course the fact that we cannot destroy the family doesn't mean that we won't try, and the fact that we try means that we may well destroy much that we value around us and leave others to somehow reconstitute things from the rubble. So I hope that we can avoid taking that route, partly by a continued insistence on the fact that the family is, like many other truths, not something that we invent and could alter if we felt like it, but something that we discover, like the entire moral law. We can obey it or we can disobey it, but we can't actually amend it or abolish it. Now again, as a person who recognizes that the Toronto Maple Leafs aren't exactly making their Stanley Cup run right at the moment, I'm prepared to concede that as usual the odds are quite long, and I just came across this as I again was getting ready to do the conference. Blacklock's reporter It says a bare majority of Canadians are confident in the federal government, according to Elections Canada research. I'm not sure why Elections Canada is researching this, but it says that only 54% expressed confidence in the federal government. And I read that and thought, how could it be that high? I mean, even granted that not everybody thinks the same things are wrong that we think is wrong, you would imagine that NDP supporters on the whole think they don't have confidence in the federal government because those no-good Liberals are in the pocket of the evil corporations, and we intend to bring them down as soon as we stop propping them up 4 years from now. But just to survey the performance of the federal government and say to yourselves, yep, that thing's humming along. Well, obviously, there are many people who have not yet opened their eyes there in the basket. On the other hand, I look at it as more fish in the barrel. If all we have to do is convince people the federal government's not working, then that ought to be a pretty low bar for us to topple over as we proceed. Now, for some reason, speaking of technology, my computer's decided that it does not want to scroll through the pages of my text. That's very interesting. So, having overcome that obstacle, and without even any feedback, except disgruntled noises from the audience, I've come up with 3 points to focus on, which will be somewhat familiar to you, but nevertheless, if it was true last year, it's probably still true this year, and it may well be true next year as well, and I'll use a different template for the PowerPoint to make it seem as though there's an element of originality here. But the 3 things that were on my mind this morning as I was reflecting on what had been said and what was being said and what should be said, the first one is to tell the truth, the second one is to support the infrastructure, and the third one is to spread the word. And it's curious the extent to which, like that thing about how much smarter your parents get once you hit 18, how much wiser I have started to think people like Gandhi and Solzhenitsyn were with what had at one point seemed to me to be quite a naive statement about fixing the world. They said you must tell the truth, and I thought, well, if that was all it took, somebody would have already. But Solzhenitsyn did once say that if everybody told the truth under communism for one day, the system would collapse. And that means that it's a really important thing to do. It doesn't mean it's an easy thing to do, but I think that we keep thinking, how do we do this? How do we do this? Oh, it's so difficult and so forth. And yes, it is difficult, but as Ronald Reagan said, our problems have simple solutions. They're just not easy ones. And it's curious that among the many quotations that I piled up in my draft notes for my second talk, I also had this one from Andrew Carnegie. As I grow older, I pay less attention to what men say. I just watch what they do. And you might think, well, that kind of runs contrary to that thing you just said about telling the truth. But actually, people's actions do tell the truth. That is one of the things about making sense of the world. I remember Jordan Peterson commented on this at one point, that in psychoanalysis, when you're running into the convoluted defensive mechanisms that people often have with respect to the problems they want to get rid of but cling to at the same time, he said, you simply sort of turn off the sound and watch the results that their actions repeatedly and predictably bring. And this will reveal to you their motives. And in fact, his example was Hitler. And he pointed to where Hitler ended up, blowing his own brains out in the smoking ruins of Germany. And Peterson said, well, that Hitler was just fundamentally absolutely nihilistic and destructive all along. And everything else was really aiming at that. And so I think it's really important that we should tell the truth by what we do as well as by what we say. And another more homely way of putting this is, or would be, there we are, live your life so folks won't have to lie at your funeral. Sorry. And by the way, the reference to Verne, there was a very good cartoon called Kudzu, the author of which unfortunately was in a fatal car accident, but he had one of his comic strips, the preacher at a funeral was indicating the deceased and saying, now, Verne here was the kind of guy who just didn't know the meaning of the word can't. And there was a kind of snicker from the assembled crowd, and he said, okay, to be fair, he didn't know a lot of other short words either. But one of the things that you would want people not to have to lie about at your funeral, I think, is they should be able to say that we never deliberately told a lie, either by stating it out loud or by remaining silent when we knew that a lie had just been told. So I think it is very important that we not acquiesce in lies. It's not enough that we ourselves don't tell them. And as I said yesterday, suaviter in modo, fortiter in re, that is, this isn't a recipe for causing quarrels by saying, no, you're lying, and breaking up family gatherings that could be saved by playing a board game or something like that. The idea is not to be rude. It's like the Apostle Peter, that we should always be willing to explain pleasantly the reason for the hope that we have. And therefore, that when we encounter something that we know is a lie, we should, in the spirit of trying to get everybody to stop pretending they believe the lies, to open the way to the truth by expressing it ourselves, as gently and as welcomingly as we can, but without flinching and without pretending. And I think this is very important because in some sense, all the battles that we fight, everything we've talked about in all these conferences and everything that we will talk about in future conferences is about truth versus lies. That all these bad things come from the father of lies. And that in some sense, what has been going on all along is that people have been trying to get rid of truth, somehow to make it not be. Like Gollum, when Sam asks him if he's ever seen an Oliphant, and Gollum says, we never saw them, we doesn't want to see them, we doesn't want them to be. That there is a very fundamental attempt to make truth not be in the minds of radical people. And in fact, if you look at the course of radicalism over the last 500 years, it's extraordinary how much more cosmic it has become, starting with very concrete things that wanted to change and ending up with deconstructionism and all these other modern philosophies that literally deny the existence of truth. And again, the denial that men and women exist is a classic piece of trying to make something obviously true not be. And here I'm looking around for the children in the room because there's a quotation that has haunted me ever since I read it. In a book by a former existential philosopher named William Barrett. And I was in graduate school at the time. And I was also reflecting, looking back, it's amazing how many good books I read in graduate school and how few of them were given to me by my professors, either as textbooks or by recommendations. I discovered the Conservative Book Club. This is so long ago that they would mail me lists of books they thought I might want to read. And if I wanted to read one of them, I would mail them back a check, and then they would mail me the book. But also, there was a particular bookstore in Toronto that I used to just wander into and look on the shelves, the Bob Miller book room. And I think Bob Miller was an old-time hippie, and a lot of the clientele were clearly fond of herbal remedies and were not of my persuasion even back then. But the bookstore was full of interesting books from all kinds of points of view because the world was more like that back then. And one of these was this book I found by William Barrett called The Illusion of Technique, about this notion that we could somehow substitute for the eternal verities complex mathematical rules and ruling by experts that would change our lives. And as I say, there was this one passage, and I have been tempted to quote it repeatedly, but it does contain some pretty strong language, and so I've never done it before, but today I'm going to. And you've had your trigger warning, but in this crowd, right, trigger warning is this safety's off on this here handgun, so that's okay. And before I get to it, there's another point I want to make. People will often tell you that, environmentalism is the modern Marxism, or that we're facing cultural Marxism, or something along those lines. And I want to suggest to you that, in fact, it's not a matter of modern radicalism being just more Marxism. It's a matter of Marxism having been one more kind of radicalism. That Marxism shares with modern radicalism some important basic qualities because all radicalism has them. But a lot of what Marx actually said has been dumped by the left like a load of old fish heads, because it's something much more fundamental that is going on. And I bring this up because Barrett was talking about the Soviet Union, and so you've been trigger warned, and here it comes. To deliver humankind from alienation is one of the great promises that Marxism had made. To overcome alienation and disaffection, the state finds itself now plunged into the business of producing happiness. It is not enough that the dictator has the antecedent right over our body. He must also pry open our jaws and pour the slop of his happiness down our gullets. The rapist is not satisfied unless he exacts a smile from his victim. And that is a horrifying way to put it. But it really does explain why a dictator is happy if you just don't complain. But a tyranny of a totalitarian sort insists that you are enthusiastic, that you join the young pioneers, that you take part in the Lenin's birthday celebrations, and you troop past this ghastly mummified thing. I mean, having preserved Lenin's body eternally when they were atheists always struck me as sort of giving the game away. But you see this too with modern radicalism. It won't even let you be silent. It insists that you join the relevant club on campus and all this kind of thing, that you endorse the diversity, inclusion, and equity training, that you actively speak up, that you list your pronouns. All of this stuff, they are not happy until you smile. And as somebody else, Christopher Hitchens once said, Stalin tortured people not to force them to reveal facts, but to force them to collude in fictions. And there was another interesting example of this, again, back to the beginning of World War II. Adolf Hitler, on the 1st of September 1939, said, Polish regular officers fired on our territory. Since 5:45 a.m., we have been returning the fire. And you think to yourself, why does Hitler need to pretend Poland attacked Germany? Like, what's anybody going to do if he says, we attacked Poland, ha ha ha, who's going to stop us? And yet, in his mind, it was really important not to fool you into thinking that Poland had attacked Germany, but to make you tell that untruth as though it were a truth, to make you enthusiastically take part in the dishonesty. And as I say, the initial impulse to liberate people, this sort of metaphysical thing to get rid of alienation, started basically with economics, and then it got into social class, and then it got into gender, and again to this whole metaphysics where the deconstructionists tell you that there is no truth, that texts have no meanings. And yet, and this is critical again, if you try not to pay them according to their employment contract, they sue you. What they're trying to do is make you tell the non-truth and make you yourself say with a smile that it is true that there is no truth. And that's why I think it's just so important that we stand our ground and not be made to acquiesce in lies. Not to hear a thing we know is untrue or even nonsensical and fail to say, that is not true, and I know it is not true. The second thing, and yes, here it's a bit familiar, passing the hat, support the infrastructure. And as I said, all of you have done that in the primary sense that you have come here and you've paid the conference fee. And money being necessary in this fallen world, that means there will be another conference. But it is also important to, when you go back home and people are complaining to you about the state of the world, to tell them, well, make sure you find $100 or $200 a year and give it to those outfits, including the EEA, including John Carpe, including Michelle Sterling, and of course, you can think of other people who obviously should be on your list. And make sure that they put up the cup of coffee a month, because almost all of them have it, and if they don't, they can go find someone that does, right? And this is, last time I looked at Jordan Peterson's Patreon statistics, which was years ago, he was getting something like $50,000 a month. But he was getting it, from something like 7,000 people. So they were giving him individually under $8 a month. And that's how it's done. I mean, again, as I say, if any of you's got $1 million that you'd like to give me, thank you. I will indeed take it. I'm not proud. But it goes beyond that. That's my past hat, and I did buy books, so I'm cool. But to join the organizations that we've had people here speaking on behalf of, to sign up, to take part, to serve on the board if need be, to be active participants in the continued vitality of this parallel voluntary society that does not share the mainstream view of things, to make sure that there is a vibrant civil society, because one of the great sadnesses of places like Russia or China is that they just don't have that kind of thing. There is a overbearing but incompetent state and a terribly passive population. And so when I talk about supporting the infrastructure, I mean make sure that we are not a passive population, that we do not get tired or discouraged, that we keep belonging, we keep volunteering, we sign up. You know, one of the things we always tell people, please subscribe to our YouTube videos, even if you haven't got time to watch them or you think I haven't said an original thing in 3 years. Other people will find them more readily if you click the subscribe button. So just make sure that you're part of the ferment of the conservative, intellectual, and social infrastructure that is out there. And of course, there are a lot more dramatic things like making the homeschooling work. There are many, many more active ways that you can be involved, but we all have only this much time and energy. We all have many worthy things to do, but it is important to do that. You know, so you can even send letters to the editor, much good may it do you, but again, it is important, as I said before, one of the critical things that we can do who are engaged is to let other people know they're not alone. That the things that bother them bother somebody else, that somebody else thinks something can be done about it, that the tragedies that we have experienced, other people have experienced, that you are not alone in the world in this either, or in being able to carry on and make something positive out of this terrible thing. And this takes me into the third one about spreading the word, because when we gather in these conferences, of course, we're trying to figure out what's going on, and we're discussing it and sharing ideas and so on. But we're also trying to improve our ability to explain it to others, to communicate to sympathetic people more deeply how it works, and also to give them a better capacity and confidence to carry it out themselves into the public sphere. Because a lot of people don't speak up because they figure they're going to get squashed by the clevers. You know, if they were on a television panel with Andrew Coyne, he would run rings around them. Andrew Coyne's quite a clever chap. But if we are right, then we have better arguments, and so we come in here to try to work on those arguments and to talk back and forth about how we explain what is the right way to carry this forward, what is the wrong way. And so we then want to go out to the other people we know, the people we are connected with, and share with them what has happened here so that it ripples outward and we persuade more and more people of the truth of what we are saying, but also we persuade them that they can in turn help to spread that truth more widely. And so this is why I think it's just so important to help other people not be intimidated into silence, to help other people have a good supply of Calvin Coolidge stories with which to liven the mood while they are conveying serious truths. And another of these things that just happened to turn up from the Epoch Times again, for whom I now write, use what talents you possess. The woods would be very silent if no birds sang there except those that sang best. And that is, I think, another very important part of it. Just because you're not in a position to transform Canadian public affairs in the next 3 days doesn't mean you shouldn't do whatever it is that you can do. That you should not put your shoulder to the wheel wherever it seems that the cause is stuck in the mud, even if it's a small wheel and a small puddle of mud, or a small wheel in some very gooey mud. Do what you can and never get discouraged. Remember Barack Obama ran on that slogan, "Yes, we can," and it turned out in some ways they couldn't. But at the time I thought to myself, there's in many ways Canada has the national slogan, "Yes, we can't." And I thought we've got to get past that. And so then I'm going to give you another American example. It was from the autobiography of Frank Capra, right, whose It's a Wonderful Life has become a Christmas staple because it was such a dud at the time that they let the copyright lapse. That's how it ended up coming back onto television. So strange ways that the Lord works. But he talks about working on Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which of course he was making just before the Second World War. And he thought to himself, is this a fatuous thing to be doing when the state of the world is so horrible? And as he was thinking about this, he happened to go to the Lincoln Memorial, and he heard a little boy reading the second inaugural to his grandfather, and he thought, that scene must go into our film. We must make this film if only to hear a boy read Lincoln to his grandpa. And then he said, it is never untimely to yank the rope of freedom's bell. And as a matter of fact, when France was occupied by the Germans, first sort of partly and then very, very firmly, and the Germans closed the movie theaters because, of course, they knew what the films the French were going to show. Many theaters chose Mr. Smith Goes to Washington as the last one they showed. And so it is never untimely to yank the rope of freedom's bell. And we don't have to worry if we are not skilled bell ringers, or we're not even sure about the bell we're connected to, or if the rope is very strong. It is never untimely to ring freedom's bell. And since it was Anne was mentioning whether there should have been poetry in her talk, well, I'm not much of one for poetry. Doggerel is kind of my normal genre, but I did also want to put up something that was once familiar in schools, and maybe many of you would have encountered it, from Macaulay's mid-19th century Lays of Ancient Rome. Then out spoke brave Horatius to the captain of the gate, "To every man upon this earth death comes soon or late, and how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?" And with those words, Horatius rallies two comrades to help him hold the bridge while everybody else gets to safety. And it's interesting that what then happens, and I wasn't aware of this until recently, but I think somebody else may have been, is that when the bridge is about to collapse, he tells the other two, "Okay, get out of here. There's nothing more you can do here." And after the bridge collapses, he plunges into the water, and they think he is lost, but eventually he resurfaces. And again, those of you who are Lord of the Rings fanatics may be reminded of the scene at the bridge in Moria, when Gandalf finally tells Aragorn and Boromir to make their way to safety because swords can do no more here. And then Gandalf plunges into the abyss as the bridge collapses, stopping the enemy, only, plot spoiler, to reappear again later. And so this really is the spirit that I want us to go forth with. And by the way, one of the things I have felt about this conference is that even more than the others, there has been a surprising amount of laughter here. I always talk about we need to have joy, and I have felt that this has been a joyful gathering, and I think that's a very positive thing, and we should all be very proud of that. Because again, of course I'm going to leave by quoting Chesterton. Pessimism is not in being tired of evil, but in being tired of good. And that is why we do not become pessimistic just because the world is such a bleak place and 54% of Canadians have confidence in the federal government and the radicals seem to have us on the run and tyranny is on the rise in the world and everybody's forgotten the existence of truth and a few other things that could be taken as discouraging if we were prone to that kind of thing. But we are not tired of good, and therefore we shall not tire of fighting against evil. So even though this is not in fact the final talk, well, I hope it's not, because if it is, it means the technology failed disastrously. The message that I want to leave you with as we do depart is to go forth refreshed and armed with the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, for sort of filling in. Andrew, I couldn't help but notice him saying, if you have $8 a month, I'd give it to Andrew or Danny, but if you have $1 million, I'll take it. I guess whoever's asking, you can ask for however much you want. So do we have Jim, have we got the technology working? Good grief. Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, the sound works. Okay, well, let me, I guess I'll start on my closing remarks, and then we'll see if he gets back before my closing remarks are done. We'll see what he has to say, and if he doesn't, we won't. Talking about, I was a little bit concerned about what I was going to say about, but one of my pet peeves is all the, I think it was September 1st, wasn't it, when Justin Trudeau was honoring the residential schools. And I mean, I don't think there's anybody in the country that's proud of some of the things that happened at the residential schools, but the residential schools weren't the only place where people were having a tough life. As I started out to tell you, my grandmother had 8 kids. I'm not exactly sure how it all went, but her 3-year-old died, and then she had a 1-year-old, and then she went to the hospital to have another baby, and she left the 1-year-old with the neighbor. And while she was having what was her 3rd child, the 1-year-old drowned at the neighbor's. And to her credit, she never ever told the next 6 kids that like who the neighbor was. But So when you look at, I haven't studied it, but I doubt that 25% of the kids died at the residential schools, and yet my grandmother did her best and lost 2 of her 8 kids. And one day we were talking about, I'll get back to my closing remarks. I think we have, Jim Brown, are you there? Well, I can see you, but I can't hear you. Modern technology. I have to say, can you hear us, Jim? Okay, how about that? Can you hear us, Jim?
I can hear you.
There.
Can you hear me?
Here's a round of applause for you now that we've got the communication working. So without further ado, I'll let you start talking before we lose the connection. So go ahead. They know that you wrote Rescuing Our Underachieving Sons, and that you've been a proponent of letting boys be boys. So you go ahead and we'll talk later, okay? Go ahead.
You bet. Thank you very much. You can hear me. Okay. I'm going to talk.
Go ahead. We can hear you, or at least we could. Okay. 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 Can you see me? Thumbs up from us. We can hear you. Okay. Okay, you can start, yep. Go ahead. Right. Maybe I'll phone him again. No. Your turn. Go ahead. This, like I always say when I'm. Can you unmute it and say we're going to mute it? You start talking, or do you want me to phone him? James, we can hear you. You can start talking. Just start talking.
I'll talk to you.
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you. You just start talking. We can hear you. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Do this. We can do it.
Somewhere in Ontario, I don't know where.
Rural Ontario with no internet? I don't know.
Right.
Kicked himself off. So nothing we can do.
I think I'll just send him a text and say we're going to pass on this. Do you think, or what do you think?
Okay, I'm gonna try it one more time.
Okay.
Right, I'm here.
Okay, we could hear you, but David muted the room, so we weren't getting feedback. So if you just start talking, and if it gets to where we can't hear you, we're just going to hang up and be done. But we could hear you if you just start talking and go through your presentation. And when
Okay, we'll give it a try, no problem.
Yeah, give it a try.
15.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Bye for now. I think it'll be work. Yeah, bye. What's that? Sorry. Okay.
Wondering if he realizes
Oh, he's kicked off. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Cancel culture, yeah.
Well, somebody keeps hanging up on me, but other than that, I'm here.
Okay.
Ready to go.
Well, your link has disappeared now. Your link, you have to click on the link again, back on for the live stream link.
Okay, well, can I talk without that?
Well, you could try that. We could. Why don't we? You go ahead, and we'll just see if we can hear you. You go ahead.
Okay. I'm willing to give it a try. Here we go. First of all, my thanks to Danny. In my life, in any of our lives, there are a few people that make a significant difference for us that we remember forever, because they make a difference in our lives. And in my case, one of these is Danny. So my thanks to Danny, and my great admiration for him and for what he's doing. I have no idea whether you're hearing me or not, but I'm trying anyway. As well as all this, I noticed that a lot of the people that presented today, and you're outstanding people, absolutely, are people that I have had contact with or that I know, and I am definitely intrigued by and influenced by. Anyway, the topic I'm going to talk about, or try to talk about, is the fact that the future of our boys, not our girls, our boys, is in real crisis. And thus, the future of our Canadian families is in crisis as well, because there is definitely a connection between the two. So I'm going to talk about two things here. One of them is what is happening in our society, and then secondly, what can parents do? I'm going to comment about the education system based on things I've been hearing the last couple of days. And so the issue for me is, what is the education system, how is it supposed to function? And I would suggest that the education system comes from the idea that parents wanted their children to be educated, so they got together and they built a school and they hired a teacher. And then to make things more convenient, they elected representatives who would meet on a regular basis that we call trustees. And that fundamentally, the education system is the parents coming together to build a school and hire a teacher to teach their children. And if what's happening at the school is not satisfactory, well, then they replace the people concerned. Unfortunately, as time has gone on, this has been largely taken over by a combination of government and, lest I say it, unions. Having been a union president in the education field myself, but when it gets down to decisions and everything involving children being made by people who really don't have any connection to it, and the parents of those children, in a lot of ways being pushed aside, I'm not so sure that that's what should be going on. Now, what's happening, and this is serious, very serious stuff, is that a lot of what we've done is we've made changes in order to meet various interest groups' concerns, and it's resulted in, and I'm going to say a few things here, it's resulted in the virtual elimination of male teachers from the education business, and that's significant because what we know historically is that boys have had difficulty getting through elementary school, largely because the majority of teachers were women who didn't understand what it was like to be a little boy. And that boys, when they went to secondary school, did very well. The ones that got through the elementary system and went to secondary school did very well because virtually all of the teachers were male. Girls didn't do as well in secondary school, and that was one of the reasons. So we've culturally made a decision to eliminate a lot of the men from education, and the winners out of this are the girls, and the losers, unfortunately, are the boys. And that's not a maybe, that's very significant, and anybody that studied sociology knows of what I'm speaking here. We've changed our evaluation methods for evaluating student performance, and what's happened as a result of that is that the teacher bias, and I'm not saying a deliberate bias, I'm saying just a bias that exists, is playing a major factor. So when children wrote examinations and so on that very often were provincially set, and the papers were marked without anybody knowing who was writing what and which teacher was marking which work. Boys did very well. Girls less well. Not badly, but less well. Once we switched away from that to teacher evaluation, boys suddenly began to drop off the map, and girls' scores went up dramatically. So one of the studies that was done by the Ontario Secondary School Federation using Queen's University to do the examination and the writing of the report. And what came out of that was that if they took children's papers, students' papers, and gave them to teachers to mark, if they put a boy's name on the paper, it got a significantly lower mark than it got if it had a girl's name on it. Now that's a study done by Queen's University, so we're not talking about something some fly-by-night organization. And that particular study was replicated in the U.S. It was replicated in the U.K. It was replicated in Australia, and each time the results come out the same. So what's happening is our boys can do their best, but if a girl does exactly the same, she's going to get significantly higher grades, and therefore she's going to have a better chance of getting in post-secondary education and so on. Well, when you operate on that, and when you gradually eliminate the men teachers from the school system, the bias becomes, and I'm not saying a deliberate bias, but the bias that exists becomes a major factor. And so student success or lack of success is determined less by their performance than it is by their gender, by whether they're boys or girls. Now, through the 1980s, 90s, and so on, school boards in Ontario, I can't speak for the whole country, but in Ontario, school boards were required to engage in blatant discrimination in hiring and in promotions in order to favor women. And this was put forward as affirmative action. Well, the result is that the education system in Ontario, anyway, and I think that's true probably around the world, has been increasingly feminized. And of course, girls are doing much better. Unfortunately, boys have ceased to show the steady improvement they had shown in the past, and they're now actually doing worse than they used to do. In fact, the research shows that many boys are now underachieving in school. That is, they're not achieving the maximum of their potential, and they're being penalized for it. This is all complicated by the fact that the system has this unfortunate bias that exists. I'm not saying a deliberate one, but I'm saying that it does. And I can say, as with the background in psychology that I have and so on, I can say that and as a parent of 5 children, I know what it's like to be a boy, and I know what it's like to be a girl, but I only know what it's like to be a girl in terms of my brain episode. But in terms of really knowing what it's like, I don't. I know what it's like to be a boy because I was a boy and I grew up a boy. I'm not as good at having any intrinsic understanding of being a girl. Well, that's affected in our school system. So we now have a situation where in the U.S. they did a major study looking at children of kindergarten age, and they did tests on the children in terms of their literacy, in terms of their math and their science. And they discovered that the boys were slightly secondary to the girls in literacy, not significantly, but a bit. They were higher in math and significantly higher in science. without giving those results to the teachers, they interviewed the teachers and went down each children's, their understanding of how the children were doing. And the teachers, without exception, said the girls were doing significantly better than the boys in reading, in literacy, and the girls were doing as well as or better than the boys in math and in science. Now, unfortunately, that wasn't even close to true, but that was the teacher's perception. Unless the boy exhibited feminine characteristics, in which case the boy was ranked like a girl. Now, parents are given that information. They're given the information that their boys aren't doing up to snuff, and their girls are, and that influences parental expectations. And I can give you all kinds of information about that, but it affects parental information understanding, and the result is that boys begin to drop out of school psychologically. In elementary school, a lot of boys do. That they're not allowed to leave, so they're physically present. That they're no longer committed at all. And this has meant that for the first time in history, the number of boys, the percentage of boys going to post-secondary education is declining. Never happened before. It's always been an increase. Now it's declining. And the number of boys who, when they leave secondary schools, file up, down, and sideways, that they'll never set foot in a classroom again, is increasing significantly. So we've created a problem, and so what do we do now as parents? What do we do? Well, the educational research tells us that the number one predictor of long-term success in school, the number one predictor of long-term success in school, is the level of literacy skills a child has before starting school. I didn't say reading ability, literacy skills in general, before the child starts school. However, today, due to societal factors and parental practices, many boys are behind girls their age in terms of their literacy skills when they start school. And so they start off behind, and the school system, because of the way it operates, is not very good at closing that gap. It really isn't very good at it. So what are some of the societal factors? Well, the reality is that where children don't have two parents, they don't do as well. And a major study that was done in the UK under the Prince's Trust came up with the fact that a number of things, where young men grew up without a male role model, they were significantly more likely to stay unemployed for longer than their peers. They were twice as likely to abuse drugs. They were statistically more likely to feel suicidal. They were twice as likely to turn to or consider turning to crime as a result of being unemployed. They were more likely to state they had a sense of a lack of identity. They were 3 times more likely to feel down or depressed all the time. They were significantly less likely to feel happy and confident. If they were unemployed, they suffered mental health problems such as panic attacks, self-loathing, and depression, and much more likely to be involved with gangs and to look up at gang leaders as role models. So there's an impact to boys not having a male role model in their lives. So how do we deal with that? Well, in the past, the way we dealt with that was we had things like Boy Scouts and boys clubs and so on that boys could belong to. Well, of course, those are rapidly being phased out, and so now we have boys and girls clubs, usually with a female leader, and Boy Scouts have become Scouts, and in many cases with a female leader. And so the making up for the fact that you don't have a male role model in your home isn't there anymore. It's disappearing. When you look at family court, when you look at advertising, when you look at the books that are written, when you look at cartoons, you can see what's happening to our appreciation of the fact that boys have unique characteristics. Some of the things parents are doing, well, we're looking at single parent families. We're looking at parents reading to their girls but not reading to the boys. And I can say that as a parent, the danger is that you read to your girls and give them books, and you give sports equipment to your boys and go play hockey with them. Unfortunately, the boy doesn't develop an affinity for books or reading, and is at disadvantage to when he arrives at school. And a lot of the books in the office of the publishers will tell you this, about 10 times as many books are published for young girls as for young boys. And parents tend to buy more books for their daughters than they do their sons. And the school system, in spite of good intentions, don't seem to be very good at dealing with that. Schools now are likely to tell parents that their son has a learning disability. That was, I might add, that evidence shows us his school caused. Or has ADHD, and I can give you information on how you deal with ADHD, and we're not doing it. And they tend to use teaching methods that recognize girls' learning styles and not boys. So as a result, many boys are struggling at school. Many boys are developing learning disabilities that are psychological in nature, caused by the school system. And boys are very often disengaged by school at a very early age. Research is showing that grades are awarded based more on gender than on performance. Parents' expectations are shaped by schools' gender bias. ADHD is misdiagnosed, and that's become rampant. In a feminized education system, typical boyish behavior is viewed and treated as a disorder. Well, girls are doing much better, boys are doing much worse. And so that's a major problem. So what are some things that are happening to boys? Boys are showing behavioral issues at school. They're getting suspended. They're dropping out in mind and then later in body. They're not going to post-secondary education. We get into substance abuse, crime, mental health issues, long-term unemployment, eventually suicide. Only 40% of university students now are male, and that percentage is declining. Boys are in the minority in almost all professional schools, and it's declining. University graduates, however, earn 70% more than high school graduates, and university graduates are much less likely to be employed. So boys are really taking a beating at the moment. And so we need to be dealing with this. We need to be taking a serious look at this as an issue and what we can do about it. One of the questions we have to ask is, have boys become intellectually inferior, or has the education system changed that's now victimizing boys? Well, the answer is pretty clear. And we can reduce the number of children, girls and boys, diagnosed with learning disabilities and ADHD. It's been done. The children benefited. Unfortunately, it might not have been all that well received by unions. So anyway, parents have to help boys to become achievers in school, and so I have no idea whether I'm still even talking to anybody, but I'm trying. So tips for parents to consider: we have to recognize that learning is holistic in nature. We have to speak to very young children, including boys, face to face, so that they can see our lips moving. We have to speak with, and not just to, young children, including boys. We have to do it on a regular basis. And we need to read to and with children, including boys, and listen to them read. So, and these things make a significant difference, and they don't cost anything. They're not difficult to do. Children need to see us engaged in reading, and that includes, they need to see dads engaged in reading. They need to see it, not just to hear that it happened. We need to give children their own books even before they can read. And there are types of books that work better with boys than other books. And so I'm going to offer you, I'm going to offer this through Danny, if Danny is interested. If Danny gives me
I am interested, and we can hear you, so we're certainly carry on. Thank you.
You're
Just
still
so you
following?
know.
Okay. I'm rumbling along here because I know I don't want to keep everybody overnight. I have published a book called Rescuing Our Underachieving Sons. And Danny, if you want, I'll send you any number you want. Any number. I'll send you 100 if you want. And you can sell them, give them away, whatever, but put them in the hands of people that are rated, because this is really fundamental, and it covers all these issues that I've been talking about. In fact, it covers a lot of the issues that the various presenters over this day and a half have talked about. So, and I will send you, I say 100. If you want to send more than that, no cost. I'll look after the cost of it. And you can make them available to anybody who wants them, because it's important that people read it. It's of no value, whatever, sitting in my spare room. And it's of no value, whatever, sitting on a bookshelf somewhere. So if anybody wants them, I will send them to you. I'll get an address from you to send them, and I'll get them shipped to you, as many as you want. And when I say as many as you want, I'm serious. Any number at all, and I'll do it at my own expense. No problem there. This matters to me. You know it matters to me, Danny. You know from meeting me those years ago and talking to me since. You know this matters to me. It's very, very important. And out of that came the fact that very few books are written for boys. So although I didn't have a purpose in mind for writing books, but I have written, and you've received some because you've read them to your grandchildren, I am prepared to send you a raft of children's books as well, no cost. And you can handle it any way you want, but I'll send you a whole pile of those. And I have a total of 35 children's books that I've written, and they are they're half of them are in English and half are in French. And the key character in one of them is Jack, and of course his cat Gizmo, and Jack, of course, is a white boy. And then there's a set called Jamal and Gizmo, and Jamal is a black boy. And there's Jay and Gizmo, and Jay is an indigenous boy. So if people are interested in that, I'll send those along, and you can handle it any way you want. As I say, I have faith in you, I have confidence in you, and and this stuff matters to me. If it didn't matter, I wouldn't be doing it. Anyway, one last bit of advice for parents on what they can do to help their kids that are currently in school. I can put out messages like homeschooling is a great idea, as is a number of these others, but 3 things you can do regularly. Have a conversation with your child about what happened at school today. I know the child's going to say nothing, but it's important that you pursue this. And it's been shown by work done in Simon Fraser that students do about 30% better when their parents actually say to them, "What did you learn today that was worth knowing?" And if they do that consistently, it makes a difference. And I'm not making the numbers up. They're from Simon Fraser, so they're legitimate. We need to set and clarify expectations for children. They need to know what exactly we expect them to do. And we need to model desirable behavior. So if we want them to read, then they need to see us reading too. And if they see their mother reading and never see their father reading, or never see their male role model reading, then they eventually get the idea that reading is for girls and not for boys. So we need to do that. We need to meet with our teachers, our children's teachers, at the beginning of the school year, not at Christmas time or whatever, but in September, and meet with them as equals. The teacher is the expert in teaching. I'm a parent, and I'm an expert on my child. And so let's share our knowledge, our information as equals. We need to have the same high expectations for our sons as we have for our daughters. Incidentally, this is all in these books I have, so if people aren't able to follow this, they can read about it. We need to convey these expectations to our children, because how our children do is largely, or to a great extent, set by what they believe. If they believe that they are good students and successful students, they'll do well. If they believe that they're losers, they are not likely to do as well. So it's important that we do that. We need to insist, and this is for anybody there as a parent, we need to insist that the school system start taking steps toward balancing the male-female ratio in the academic setting in the school, because I don't know what the situation is in Alberta, but in Ontario, you can easily go into a number of elementary schools and there isn't a single male there. All the teachers are female. So the boys early on learn that school is not for boys, it's for girls. In secondary schools, there used to be like 80+% male teachers. They aren't now, they're down below 50%. So unless we do something about this, unless we make an issue of this, our boys are going to continue to be losers, and in fact, they're going to be even more losers. We need to look at the awards that schools give to boys and girls, and I've investigated this, and when you see 11 awards given and 10 of them go to girls, it tells you something. It tells you about the culture they have, and it tells you about how people are making decisions. However, you can only deal with this as a parent if you know about it. So I'm suggesting to you that you spread the word. Spread the word. And I'm also offering to anybody who's interested, anybody who's interested, if you invite me to speak with your group, I'd be happy to do it. I'll do it free, no problem, and I'll probably do it with a computer that works. But
well, that would be nice, but this is going quite nicely as well, so carry on, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm doing the best I can here. So, but I am, if any group wants to have me come speak for half an hour, speak for an hour, whatever, answer questions, help parents make decisions, deal with individual people and so on, I'm happy to do it. I was out of the market for a while there because I was very ill, but I'm bouncing back now, and I'm quite happy to help in any way I can. And of course, I'm going to lay this on you. Read my books,
yep.
And so get the children's books for your sons. Get these books I've written are children's books, but they're really focused toward boys. But it doesn't mean girls can't read them, but boys are more likely to engage with them. So read them to get books for your sons, grandsons, and so on, and also get some for your local library. Just donate them to the local library, and don't donate them to the school library. And of course, I'm going to say, make sure you read the book Rescuing Our Underachieving Sons, because that really is a good book, and it's still selling very well online.
Jim, just let me interrupt you just for 1 second, just so you know.
Sure.
David has a picture of you with your white sports shirt on, and a picture of your sandwich boards saying "Rescuing Our Underachieving Sons." So we're all getting the picture, We're getting the message, and carry on.
What I'm saying is, the people that you have there and who spoke over this last 2 days, I am incredibly impressed by. But the big message is, do something. Like, don't just feel sorry for yourself or sorry for your children. Do something. And some of the simple things you can do are if your children are in school and that's where they're going to stay, fine, go there and say, here are some books that these books are in 7 or 8 countries around the world and on 4 continents, and it's worth your while to look at it, and it's worth your while to have it available for children. And if you belong to a community organization of some kind, fine. I'm willing to send any number of books that you can distribute to people and so on. So I'm gonna do the best I can. I'm sorry I can't drive out there. I'm sorry I wasn't there in person yesterday and today. I mean, I attended it all online until everything went haywire on me. But what you're doing is really great, and I'm greatly impressed, and I think people can make a big difference. They really can.
I think
Do it for one kid.
I think you're absolutely right. And I started out reading those kids' books to my grandchildren. Now we have a grandson. When he comes, he reads the books to me at night. So it's all good. It's a good way to get me to go to sleep. So carry on, carry on.
Well, I didn't put you to sleep.
No, you didn't
I
put me to
tried,
sleep.
but
No,
I didn't
exactly.
do it.
No, you didn't. No, it's all good.
Okay, sorry to rush through all that, but I don't want to keep your with all this things being tied up. I don't want to keep your people there longer than they need to be. But
let me see if it. Let me see if it.
You and I can send back and forth, and I will send you books, no problem. Okay. And you can take donations for the work you're doing, or you can just give them away, whatever you want.
We'll take you up on that offer. Thank you very much. Does anybody have a question just before? Does anybody want to ask a question, or shall we just say thank you very much? Basically the audience will say thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing the books, and we'll make plans between us to get them out to our schools and to our children and to our grandchildren. Okay?
Super.
James, there's a warm round of applause for you, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay?
You bet. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks. Take care. Bye for now.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Well, that worked out pretty well at the end. Or John, whoops. Did you have any more closing comments, or your closing comments are done? Well, I'll just carry on with my closing comments. I think we've all had a busy day. Andrew, did you want to say something else, or always? Am I being asked to? Well, yeah. We always enjoy listening to you, so go ahead. You can, you have to be done by 4, though.
Thank you. I mentioned to Danny earlier that I haven't had an opportunity to present my 137-point plan on reforming Cambodian rice tariffs, so buckle in. It is tremendous to be here. I mean, the only place more dangerous than being between me and a buffet is being between me and a microphone, so I appreciate the opportunity. And I just want to say, first and foremost, that James Brown is a huge jerk. We've been selling our books, and then he's like, oh yeah, just take them, they're free, get people to read them. I'm like, shh, stop that. Thank you, though, and I just want to say to all of you, because I think Danny has done a tremendous job when he gets up here at thanking you for coming out, which I think is very important, and also thanking the speakers for coming up, which I also think is important generally. And I would say that getting involved is so key. When I ran for office several years ago, one of the things that I learned, which is wisdom I've shared with people in a number of contexts, is that the easiest way to get someone to donate money is to ask them to volunteer. And if you think about it, it's funny but also sad in the way, because a lot of people will give you money to make you go away. But volunteers are where we really need people. You need foot soldiers. You can have all the money in the world, you can have the $1 million that John Robson wants us all to give him, but that doesn't mean anything if you don't have the people that can actually put it into motion. And all of us have been brought here for whatever reason. But I think that we all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Danny Hozack, to Pat, to John, and I'd say in general to the spouses of the people who live in the trenches, both metaphorically and literally, because they put up with a great deal. But I think that Danny would probably like to be on a beach somewhere, just living his life, but he's here, and he's working, and he's unrelenting, and he's doing it all for us. So I think we owe him a huge debt of gratitude for not just putting this on, but all he does to put on every one of those conferences and in between. So thank you, Danny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure. It's like I always say, Pat does the work and I get to be at the front and take the credit. So like you can all thank Pat tonight when you see her at, yeah, there we are. Thank you, Pat. She's, Pat and our grandkids, but, you know, you look at it all and I guess it was actually Jim Ness's first wife who, I was speaking in Drumheller and she said, Danny, boy, you've sure done a lot of work for nothing. And I said, well, no, I wouldn't say that. I said, I've done a lot of work for no money. But I said I wouldn't trade my friends for anything in the world, like you folks included. So I don't feel like I've done it for nothing at all. I feel I've got probably the best group of friends that anybody could ever hope to have. But having said that, I wanted to get back to the comments I was on about. John was talking about not letting lies go, untalked about, and I was talking about the fact that my grandmother lost 2 of 8 kids, and there was another. There was another fellow who was actually a neighbor of, this goes back to the 50s, and whenever the scarlet fever epidemic was on. But anyway, one of his kids was sick, so at the time there was no bridges across the North Saskatchewan River north of Lloydminster. So anyway, there was a ferry at Lee Park. So the fella took the sick boy to the Lloydminster Hospital via the ferry, spent the night there. His fever was so high they thought he was going to die, but about noon the next day they said, yeah, the fever's broken, he's going to be all right, you can go back home. So anyway, he went back home. When he got home, like, his wife was there. One of the kids at home had died while he was gone. She had no other vehicle. She had no phone. She was there with the kids. One of them got sick after he left and died before he got home. And so when you listen to these, do-gooders, and I mean, I'm not belittling some of the bad things that happened at residential schools, but bad things happen to a lot of people. Like we have the little Streamstown Cemetery. And for one thing, this is a little historical note for you war historians. The last surviving, I think if I'm not mistaken, the last surviving veteran of the Boer War, his name was Ernie Ives. He's actually buried in the Streamstown Cemetery just half a mile from Bob's house. But if you go around the Streamstown Cemetery, it literally makes you weep to see the number of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4-year-old kids that are buried there. Lots of them with their mother buried there with them. And so when I hear these stories, and we have several, like some of them are gone now, but dear friends who were in residential schools, and one of them worked 45 years, like he was an Indian fella, he worked 45 years for a friend of ours, never said a bad word about the residential schools till they heard there was money for people who had been at residential schools. Oh yeah, they used to beat me up too. And so then he got his share of the money. But it hadn't bothered his life. He lived a good life. He worked on a farm, 30 miles from us. He was a really productive citizen who was like a good farmer, a good equipment worker. He was a good cattleman and a good employee and a good dear friend to my friend. And he lived a good life. And I mean, my friend said he never mentioned residential schools in the 40-some years that he knew him before they started talking about money for kids who had been in residential school. So that's just my little pet peeve when you look at some of this stuff and you think, there were tough times, and this is sort of a humorous thing about the sort of going back to the scarlet fever thing. But we had another good friend, and their neighbors had scarlet fever, and he said he was about 12 years old, and once a week he would ride over to the neighbors, and they would put a list out for the groceries, and his mom and dad would take the list back to his mom and dad, and they would go to town and they'd bring the groceries back, and then he would take them over and put them on the step. And they said, like, whatever you do, don't touch anything. And so he said he even took his own pencil and paper, and he said the list would be on the step, and he would rewrite the list onto his own paper so he didn't have to touch it. But he said after about the third week, they left the note and a $2 bill, and he said, I wrote down the list, but I took the $2. So I mean, to me, it's sort of like the math thing. Like, say, well, I mean, it might as well be dead as pass up $2 in those days. But in any event, we talked several times about several times about Getty's second inaugural address, and one of the lines there's a couple of lines that were at the end of it, and just so we know it, I think this is sort of that's something he was saying to the people who were battling when the battle was over. Well, there was two things. One, Ulysses S. Grant met with him, and he said, "What are we going to do with the prisoners at the end of the end of the Civil War?" And he said, feed them and give them their guns and their horses and send them home. Which, again, like had they punished those people, like the war it still wouldn't be over. But he said, like, feed them, give them their guns and their horses and send them home. But in his second inaugural address, he said, with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work. We are here bound up to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. And I think, like so often, it's so easy to get into this tribalism where everybody's the enemy. And I think we have to, I think we're all striving to do that, to where we just say, look, like, it's just like Nadine pointed out earlier, like at one point, not that long ago in her life, she was on the other side, and then all of a sudden she saw the light. And our dear friend Chris Mills, who was, I think a mentor to both Bob and I and Alan, who were on the beef producers, but he said, like, lobbying government or creating change, he said, is like fixing faulty wiring. You never know which connection you're going to make that will make the light come on. And so I think that's one of the things that we're doing, is we're working on all these things. I always say we're all fighting the same war, but we can't all be at every battle together. And there's so many different battles to be fought. And again, as Ann said, Pat said, like, if you get tired and discouraged, like, don't give up. Just rest, and then these fights don't get over today or tomorrow. If you're tired, rest and be ready to fight again. So that's really all I have to say. And for those of you who've been here for the first 11 conferences, I'm going to end with my, favorite Lincoln quote, which is what he said to his friends when he was leaving Illinois, what turned out to be the last time. But anyway, he said, "As I leave you, the future seems uncertain," and he said, "It's not certain when or if I will see you again, but what is certain is that you have become an important part of my life, and I will always cherish the friendship that we have garnered. And as I leave you, I will pray that the one who can come with me and yet stay with you will bless all of us." And as I told you last time, I thought that would get easier to say over time, but it hasn't, because each time as I say it, there's a longer list of people who have been here before that aren't here now. So anyway, on that cheery note, I move the meeting adjourn, and we'll let's all go to 9:16 and let's drink some red wine and white wine and have some cheerful thoughts. So thank you very much for being here. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.